In 1968, Elvis's car broke down on a Memphis street. While waiting for help, he sat at a bus stop next to an elderly woman who didn't recognize him. She told him her life story. Elvis just listened. At the end, she said, "You're a good listener, son." Elvis replied with words that made her cry. "You're the most beautiful song I've ever heard." This is the story of being nobody and hearing everything. It was a warm evening in May 1968. Elvis had taken one of his cars out alone, something he did occasionally when he needed to feel normal, when being Elvis Presley became too heavy to carry. The car started making strange noises near downtown Memphis. By the time Elvis pulled over, smoke was coming from under the hood. He called his people from a payphone. They'd send someone, but it would take at least 45 minutes in evening traffic. Elvis looked around. He was wearing sunglasses, a simple shirt, regular pants. Nothing that screamed Elvis Presley. There was a bus stop bench nearby with an elderly black woman sitting on it, fanning herself with a church bulletin. Elvis sat down on the other end of the bench, keeping his sunglasses on, and waited. The woman glanced at him, nodded politely, and went back to fanning herself. She didn't recognize him. For the first time in years, Elvis was just a stranger at a bus stop. It felt wonderful. "Hot evening?" the woman said after a moment. "Yes, ma'am, it is." "Bus is running late. Always does on Thursdays. Don't know why Thursday is special, but there it is." Elvis smiled. "How long you been waiting?" "About 20 minutes, but I don't mind. Gives me time to think. Time to rest these old bones before I get home and start dinner." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then the woman spoke again, more to herself than to Elvis. 73 years old and still riding the bus. Never did learn to drive. My William, he said he'd teach me, but then he passed before we got around to it." "I'm sorry," Elvis said quietly. "Oh, don't be sorry, son. That was 15 years ago. I've made my peace with it. Though I do talk to him sometimes when I'm riding. Tell him about my day. Figure he's listening from somewhere." Elvis didn't say anything, just kept listening. And maybe it was because he seemed genuinely interested, or maybe because she was tired and needed to talk. But Mrs. Lillian Davis started telling this stranger at a bus stop her life story. She told him about growing up in rural Mississippi during the Depression, about being one of 9 children who barely had enough to eat, about meeting William at a church social when she was 17 and knowing immediately he was the one, about them getting married with nothing but love and hope. "We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together," Mrs. Davis said. "But Lord, we were happy. William worked at the lumberyard and I cleaned houses. We saved every penny we could. Took us 12 years, but we bought a little house, just 2 bedrooms, but it was ours. Our piece of the American dream." She told Elvis about their 3 children, about the pride of watching them graduate high school, something neither she nor William had done, about her daughter becoming a teacher, her sons getting good jobs, buying their own homes. "That's the thing about being poor," Mrs. Davis said. "Makes you appreciate every step up. My grandchildren, they're going to college. College, can you imagine? My people picked cotton. My grandchildren are picking their careers. That's not just progress, son. That's a miracle." Elvis listened, nodding, occasionally asking a gentle question that would get her talking more. She told him about William's death, about the loneliness of losing your partner after 51 years, about learning to cook for one, sleep in an empty bed, make decisions without asking, "What do you think, William?" "People say it gets easier," Mrs. Davis said, "and maybe it does, but it also just gets different. You learn to carry the missing piece. You learn that love don't end just because life does." She told him about her church, about singing in the choir every Sunday, about how music was the thing that kept her going when William died. "Something about singing with other people," she said. "It reminds you you're not alone, that we're all just trying to get through this life together, and music is how we tell each other we understand." Elvis felt tears behind his sunglasses. This woman was describing everything he'd spent his whole life trying to express through his music, that fundamental human need for connection, for understanding, for not being alone. "You sing?" Mrs. Davis asked. "A little bit," Elvis said quietly. "You should sing more. World needs more people willing to make music. Even if it's just humming while you wash dishes, music makes the hard parts bearable." Mrs. Davis talked for 30 minutes straight, about her garden, her neighbors, her daily routine, about small joys, a grandchild's phone call, a good sermon, fresh tomatoes from her garden, about grief that never fully heals but becomes something you can live with. Elvis didn't interrupt, didn't share that he was famous, didn't turn the conversation to himself. He just listened with his whole attention, the way people rarely do anymore in a world that's always rushing. "You know what's funny?" Mrs. Davis said. "I've been talking your ear off and I don't even know your name." Elvis hesitated. Then, "I'm Elvis." "Elvis? That's a nice name. Don't hear it much. I'm Lillian Davis." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Davis." "You're a good listener, Elvis. That's rare. Most people, especially young people, they're always waiting for their turn to talk. But you just listened. Really listened. My William was like that. He'd let me talk through my feelings, and he'd just listen, and somehow that made everything better. You remind me of him a little bit." Elvis felt his throat tighten. "That's about the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." "Well, it's true. You've got a kind face. Even with those sunglasses on, I can tell. There's people who have kind faces and people who don't. You do." A bus appeared down the street, approaching the stop. Mrs. Davis gathered her things. A worn purse, a canvas shopping bag with vegetables. "That's my bus. It was real nice talking to you, Elvis. You made an old woman's wait time pass pleasantly." Elvis stood up with her. "Mrs. Davis, can I tell you something before you go?" "Of course, son." Elvis took off his sunglasses. "I want you to know that your story, everything you just told me about your life, your love, your family, your losses, it's the most beautiful song I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of songs." Mrs. Davis looked at him more closely now, at his face without the sunglasses. Her eyes widened. "Lord have mercy. You're Elvis Presley, the real Elvis Presley." "Yes, ma'am, and I mean what I said. Your life is more beautiful and more important than any song I've ever sung. Thank you for sharing it with me." Mrs. Davis's eyes filled with tears. "I just talked your ear off about my ordinary little life. I didn't know I was talking to you. I'm just a person, Mrs. Davis, same as you, and your life isn't ordinary. No life is ordinary when you really listen to it. Every person is a song. You're a beautiful one." The bus pulled up, doors opening. Mrs. Davis stood there, torn between getting on the bus and staying to talk more to this famous man who'd just told her she was a song. "I have to go," she said. "But Elvis, can I hug you?" "I'd be honored." She hugged him tight, this elderly woman and this superstar, just two people at a bus stop who'd shared something real. "Thank you for listening," she whispered. "Thank you for making me feel like my story mattered. It does matter. More than you know." Mrs. Davis got on the bus, paid her fare, and found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, she looked back at Elvis, still standing at the stop. He waved. She waved back, crying and smiling. When Elvis's people arrived 15 minutes later with a replacement car, they found him still sitting at the bus stop, looking thoughtful. "Boss, you okay?" Joe Esposito asked. "Better than okay. I just had the best conversation I've had in years." "With who?" "With a woman named Lillian Davis. She told me her life story. Didn't know who I was for most of it. Just saw me as someone to talk to." "What did you talk about?" "Everything that matters. Love, loss, family, getting through hard times, how music helps, how we're all just trying not to be alone." She said I was a good listener. Joe looked at Elvis, seeing something in his expression, a peace, a clarity, that hadn't been there in a while. "She was right," Joe said. "You are a good listener when you want to be." Elvis stood up from the bus stop bench. "Joe, you know what I realized? I spend all my time trying to be heard, trying to make sure my voice, my music, my performances matter. But when's the last time I just listened, really listened to someone else's story without thinking about how to respond or how it relates to me?" "Not often," Joe admitted. "Mrs. Davis's life has been harder than mine in most ways. Less money, less comfort, more loss. But she's at peace with it. She's grateful. She finds joy in tomatoes from her garden and phone calls from grandchildren. And you know what? Her story moved me more than any song I've heard in years. Because it was real. Because she lived it." Elvis got in the replacement car but didn't start driving immediately. "I want to do something," he said. "Find out where Mrs. Davis lives. I want to make sure she's taken care of, not in a charity way, in a thank you for reminding me what's real way." Over the next several weeks, Elvis had his people quietly help Mrs. Davis. They made sure her house needed no repairs. They set up a trust fund for her grandchildren's college. They delivered groceries, all done discreetly, anonymously, so she wouldn't feel like a charity case. But Elvis also did something more personal. He wrote her a letter. "Dear Mrs. Davis, you probably don't remember me, the young man at the bus stop who listened to your story. But I remember you. I remember every word you said, and I wanted to tell you that our conversation changed me. I spend my life making music for millions of people. But you reminded me that the most beautiful music isn't what's played on stages or recorded in studios. It's the music of a life lived with love and courage and grace. Your life is that kind of music. Thank you for sharing your song with me. Thank you for seeing me as just Elvis, not Elvis Presley. Thank you for reminding me what really matters." With deep respect and gratitude, Elvis, Mrs. Lillian Davis, kept that letter until her death in 1985 at age 90. Her daughter found it in a Bible, carefully preserved. At Mrs. Davis's funeral, her daughter read the letter aloud and the entire church cried. "My mother talked about that bus stop conversation for the rest of her life," her daughter said. "She said Elvis Presley called her a beautiful song. And she said if someone that famous thought her ordinary life was worth listening to, then maybe all of our ordinary lives are worth more than we think." The story of Elvis and Mrs. Davis spread through Memphis and eventually the world. It became a touchstone for discussions about celebrity, anonymity, and the importance of truly listening to people. "Elvis at the bus stop shows us something we forget," said communication professor Dr. Sarah Chen. "That everyone has a story. And when someone with Elvis's fame chooses to just listen, not perform, not dominate, just listen, it reminds us that ordinary lives are extraordinary if we pay attention to them." The story influenced other celebrities. Many cited it as inspiration for their own efforts to stay grounded, to listen more than they talk, to remember that fame doesn't make their stories more important than anyone else's. "The bus stop story changed how I interact with people," said singer John Legend. "Elvis showed that you honor people by listening to them, not by telling them about yourself, by caring about their stories. That's a lesson every famous person needs to learn." The story also resonated with everyday people who'd never felt like their lives mattered enough to be interesting. "If Elvis Presley thought some woman's life was worth listening to," one person wrote, "then maybe my life is worth telling. Maybe we all have songs in us." Mrs. Davis's story became symbolic of something larger, that the cure for loneliness and disconnection isn't speaking louder or becoming more interesting. It's listening better. It's being present with someone else's story instead of always trying to tell your own. Today, at the corner where that bus stop used to be, there's a small historical marker. It reads, "On this site in May 1968, Elvis Presley sat at a bus stop and listened to a woman named Lillian Davis tell her life story. He called her the most beautiful song I've ever heard." This moment reminds us, every life is a song worth hearing. The marker has become something of a pilgrimage site. People come to sit at that corner to think about the stories we don't hear because we're too busy to listen. Some people bring their own elderly relatives there, sit with them, and really listen to their stories for the first time. "My grandmother's stories used to bore me," one young woman wrote after visiting the site. "Then I read about Elvis and Mrs. Davis, so I asked my grandmother to tell me about her life, really tell me, and I listened, really listened. And you know what? Elvis was right. Her life was a beautiful song, and I almost missed it because I was too busy with my phone, my life, my stuff. Not anymore." The bus stop encounter remained one of Elvis's favorite memories until his death. He'd tell people about it when they asked what moment mattered most to him. Not the #1 hits, not the sold-out concerts, not the movies or the awards. A bus stop, an elderly woman, 30 minutes of listening, being nobody to somebody, hearing the beautiful song of an ordinary, extraordinary life. "That half hour at the bus stop," Elvis told Larry Geller, his spiritual advisor, "reminded me why I sing in the first place. I sing to connect, to help people feel less alone." But Mrs. Davis, she didn't need my singing to feel that. She just needed someone to listen. And when I did, when I really heard her story, I felt more connected to humanity than I'd felt in years. Elvis continued, "We think we're supposed to always be interesting, always be talking, always be performing. But sometimes the most important thing we can do is shut up and listen, really listen, because everyone Everyone has a song in them, and most of them never get to sing it because nobody's listening. Mrs. Davis's life was ordinary in the way all lives are ordinary. She worked hard, she loved deeply, she lost people, she kept going, she found joy in small things, she sang in her church choir. But because Elvis listened, really listened, her song got heard. And in being heard, she felt valued. She felt like her life mattered. She felt seen. That's what listening does. It tells people, you matter. Your story matters. Your life is worth my time and attention. Elvis Presley, who could have ignored an elderly woman at a bus stop, chose to listen instead. And in choosing to listen, he gave her a gift more valuable than money or fame, the gift of being heard. And she gave him a gift too, the reminder that the most beautiful songs aren't always the ones with melodies. Sometimes they're simply the stories of how someone lived and loved and survived. Two people at a bus stop. One talked, one listened. Both were changed. That's the power of actually hearing someone. That's the gift of treating every person like they're a song worth listening to. Because they are. Mrs. Davis was a beautiful song. Elvis knew it because he listened, and in listening, he heard what most of us miss. That ordinary lives are never really ordinary. They're symphonies of love and loss and courage and grace. You just have to stop long enough to hear them. If this story of listening, connection, and finding beauty in ordinary lives moved you, subscribe and share it. Whose story do you need to really listen to? Let us know in the comments. Hit that notification bell for more true stories about the moments that remind us we're all worth hearing.